Welcome to another episode of Crosstalk. My name is Kevin Tocci, and I'll be your host for the next 30 minutes. Now, as you have come to know from this particular program, we do our best to try to feature different things from the two communities that we serve, that's Whitman and Hanson. And from time to time, we like to be sure that we do things that, are interesting. Last year was quite a year when it came to politics, and we had different folks who were running for office, so we had a chance to bring them in. But we like to also go out on the road, and as you notice, this is not the safe confines of 115 South Avenue in Whitman. That's where our studios are located, but we happen to be in the Brass Lantern. Where is that? Well, that happens to be at the South Shore Votech, located on Webster Street in Hanover, and my guest today happens to be the Superintendent Director of this fine school, Dr. Tom Hickey. Sir?
Kevin, nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well, and it's kind of ironic because a recent show we had a chance to feature a couple of students who do their learning right in this very room.
I'm thrilled that you came on campus for this conversation. Yeah, this is, as you said, this is the Brass Lantern, and we had Mary Louise Jepson and James Andresi on a previous show. The Brass Lantern restaurant here is open to the public 4 days a week from 11:30 to 1:15, and we are able to extend the high school curriculum so that students learn the front of the house. Here, they're serving. And then behind these walls here is where our full-service restaurant is. Great. We have students that work on what we call the line and also in the baking area. And so at any point you'd come in here, you'll see students working behind the bakery case. Over there is where they're learning the current point-of-sale system. Mm-hmm. So this is, we're able to simulate a restaurant, but it's certainly fully functional, and it's a great part of their curriculum. And we spend a lot of time in here with also our school committee meetings every month. This is where we deliver our meetings every month from the Brass Lantern.
You took a page out of my notebook, because it's exactly what I was going to say, yes. Is that it also doubles for the folks who have had a chance to watch it on one of their community access, the government channel, wherever they air it. This is where they are taped, and this is where a lot of once a month, the representatives from each town, yourself, as well as some of the folks who are the administration.
That's right.
We even have, I think, a student council, someone from the student council who come in and give a little bit of a report. This is where it all happens once a month.
That's right.
And speaking of school committee, you just recently had a chance to have a conversation with the school committee about getting things ready, kind of unfurling it, the FY 2016 budget. What was that like? What is that like as somebody who kind of has to kind of take a look at the overall situation? It isn't a matter of just how many teachers and how we're going to be able to operate. There's so much more to it than that. Am I correct?
Absolutely. You have to start with reminding yourself sometimes that your school has a mission, and that the budget is an opportunity to make sure that you are moving in that direction. You could definitely get caught up in the numbers and increases and decreases, and those smaller details with taxpayer money are absolutely important. But as I said to the committee in an opening presentation, we start by looking at our mission, and we should insist that where we prioritize our dollars, it should be reflective of our mission. For South Shore Votech, as a regional school district that has 8 communities, we're responsible for having a certified budget 45 days before our earliest town meeting. So that oftentimes puts us in a planning stage that's earlier than other typical school districts. And so as a result, we are oftentimes basing budget projections. We're building a budget based on the merits of the budget, but we all know that budgets meet up, the vision meets up with the reality of what can communities afford. And that comes through a separate process at the state level. With the fact that we will now have a new governor coming in, he is afforded an opportunity, a slight delay in when he would release his budget.
Right. So it won't technically be at the end of January. It might be more so maybe early to mid-February?
That's right, exactly right. So in my world, we have a budget process that begins honestly in October. I am reaching out to our department heads for our academic programs and our vocational programs, my administrators, asking them to build what is referred to as a zero-based budget. You've got to start at zero and justify your expenses on an annual basis. We use Google Docs as a way of communicating. All department heads upload into Google Docs a very detailed budget. So books and instructional supplies, equipment, technology, shop supplies, capital. And department heads build this, they provide the rationale, and they share, the vocational programs especially, which is the heart of the school, they're also bringing these budget ideas to their industry advisors. We always have a fall advisory meeting in early November. Each of our 14 programs, we have parents, students, and industry representatives, post-secondary representatives come in. It's a great opportunity for some outside perspective on how we should be moving with our vocational programs. And so you can imagine that you might have automotive teachers saying we should buy, the next piece of equipment we should buy is a $30,000 X. And you might have industry representatives there saying, that's right, that's exactly what you should be doing. But you might also want to consider Y or Z. This helps ensure that when I'm going, if the process works, I'm bringing to the committee proposed expenditures that are rooted in reality, that are rooted in the industry wants students to be trained on these pieces of equipment, and so we have to begin by getting good advice. So once our fall advisory meeting is over, which as I said is in early November, then the process moves to me looking at the requests, meeting with department heads, cost center supervisors, other administrators, and prioritizing. At the same time, I have to be mindful, of course, of the political realities, the economic realities of where things stand. And so part of my presentation also has to show that our budget also takes into account that we do our best to try to save. Where do we cut costs, as opposed to just saying, well, last year it was here, so we've got to keep increasing and adding. And that isn't always the case. My goal is, we know costs increase, but I focus like a laser beam on trying to keep non-instructional costs at a minimum so that dollars are diverted to the core instructional areas. So for instance, less than a year ago, we signed a net metering credits agreement with the town of Scituate. We are buying their surplus solar energy at 9 cents a kilowatt hour. That is going to help to curb, it's not a guaranteed savings, because you read in the paper now about how the utility companies have some significant markups of utility rates. But these kind of steps will help us keep those utility costs in check as much as possible. I just learned, I had a recent school committee meeting. The next morning, I got an email from our department head in our electronic engineering program saying, Tom, we just got news that we just were the recipients of a $133,000 Massachusetts Life Sciences grant, the second competitive grant we've received from them in the last 3 years. We're going to be able to use those funds to increase our capacity to serve kids in our engineering academy. We're going to be buying another 3D printer. We're going to be able to buy additional equipment. If we didn't compete for those grants, obviously, you don't get them.
Right.
So we've definitely been really sharp on paying attention to grant opportunities. So it's very important in being transparent with our communities up front that we send a clear message that we are trying diligently to focus money in instructional areas and curb non-instructional costs when we can. You establish that foundation, it makes people more receptive to listening to what's your rationale, what are you looking for in the fiscal 2016 budget.
What were some of the things that you rolled out recently to the school committee, representatives of those 8 communities? Right. What were some of the highlights that you shared with them that they're taking back to their communities and saying this is what some of the things that we're going to be looking forward to in town meeting that we're going to be discussing in regards to voting yay or nay regarding our assessments?
Right. The first headliner I talked about was actually something that was not going to have a budgetary impact, and it was important to start off with. We are in the pipeline with the Mass School Building Authority to get one of our 2 original school boilers replaced. This building was built in 1962. We're the oldest regional vocational school in Massachusetts, and we have a 1961 H.B. Smith boiler. And we have done our best to maintain it. It's not in a crisis, but we went to the MSBA a little over a year ago saying we would like your support in the form of a subsidy to replace it. They granted our request, and so now we're in the process of having the schematic design work done. Long story short, we are going to be getting a new boiler. The project will run from July to December of 2015. And my early estimates are that the entire project, construction and design fees, will cost about $750,000. Wait for the sticker shock, and then provide the portion of the good news, which is that the MSBA will pay for 54% of it. Still, we're not talking chump change. We're down to the district having to incur a cost of about $350,000. What I brought to the school committee was the idea that we, the South Shore Regional School District, would use our excess and deficiency account, which is the 5% that we're allowed to set aside in the event of emergencies or major expenses, that we would use that account to cover the costs of the boiler. That means we don't go to our 8 towns asking to go into debt over this expense, a debt service which would increase town assessments over a 10-year period. And we get the work done and we pay for it. And as I said, so by December it's done. I want to point that out as it's a strategic way of saying we can cover that debt cost and make another concerted effort to keep our assessments lower. That definitely was the biggest ticket item in terms of a headliner. The second item that I talked about was the construction of a new maintenance building. Maintenance buildings obviously play an important role in the overall operation of the campus and of the school. We had a recent NEASC, New England Association of Schools and Colleges, accreditation visit, which was an excellent, wildly successful visit. They gave us several recommendations about storage. We have 14 vocational programs. We try to keep the shop space as maxed out as possible for instruction. But we do need to store things. You can imagine some of our programs, electrical, HVAC, automotive. I need courtyard space for cars. Where do I put condensers for HVAC units? So long story short on that, I made it a priority to say to our capital project subcommittee, we need to build a maintenance building. Here's the good news. Our kids can build it. So what I brought to the school committee was the idea that we've been working on to put a 3,000 square foot, 3-bay maintenance building in the back of the school. We will be clearing out an area that was an old leaching field to increase for some parking. And now all of our maintenance vehicles and maintenance storage could be in one central place. There's a barn in the back of the school as well that we will then be able to repurpose for vocational storage. And so at the end of this, and in part of my presentation, I show a slide that shows here's where the maintenance building's going to be. We're going to be able to move these school vehicles. It's like moving stuff around in your own house.
Right.
You know, if something goes up in your attic, it's probably going to stay there for 20 years. Once it gets up there, there it is. And so we have to continue. We don't have the luxury of a lot of space. We've got to be very mindful of that, and we've got to make the best use of the space possible. My engineer gave me a price of, I was double checking this, an estimate of $470,000 if we had to do this bid with outside labor.
Right.
I've budgeted $190,000 for the materials for our carpentry, electrical, and HVAC students. So in September of 2015, the funds in this budget, our students will build that maintenance building. That was the second highlight. They got plenty more, but those two are, you've got to start with the big ticket items. In the case of the boiler, no impact on the budget. Important that folks know that. The second item, a maintenance building, but pennies on the dollar when it's our own students and the instructors who are building it.
How important is it? I mean, I've heard conversations as to folks who've walked into your building and are astounded that there are parts of your building that are 50 plus years old, and they would say it doesn't look like it's any older than maybe 20 or 30 years old, and that you have a proficient you upkeep your buildings, you maintain them so well, and that you have a plan, how does that tie into the budget? I mean, is it a matter of that you have to budget that where you're always thinking ahead, that you're looking, saying, okay, we may need a new roof down the road, we may need this, and maybe what we need to do, maybe we need to pay it forward. Do you do anything like that?
Yes, absolutely. For the time that I've served as superintendent, I've brought to the committee on an annual basis a long-range facilities plan. It makes absolute sense for my committee and my facilities director and I to have that plan that you're talking about, to be able to look ahead. We do not want to be repairing things in crisis mode. It always costs more money, and it could disrupt instruction. So from everything from the aesthetics to the actual instructional space, I'm trying to project out now through fiscal 19 what some of the facility expenses are.
Right.
But for the last 4 years, we've taken some strategic approaches. So as you started off the show, we're in the Brass Lantern. This part of the building was built in 1992. I've spent the last 4 years with my facilities director trying to renovate classrooms in the original building, 1962. Renovation, everything from the typical aesthetics, the paint, some beadboard, but also lighting, and also the removal of non-instructional space. So we centralize our storage. Over school vacations, we're able to do some renovations as well. If people know what the plan is and what the direction is, it takes the surprise out of it. You always need money in maintenance for unexpected things. But with people, I believe, will rally behind a plan that is not going to leave something to the last minute. That being said, just because it's on a plan doesn't mean you can always fund it.
Right.
So one of the items that I mentioned at the school committee was that on this 1992 roof, I have some rooftop air handling units, 3 of them. And my facilities director tells me, Tom, the units were manufactured in 1989. We maintain them. There's some maintenance costs here or there, but they're going to near the end of their useful life. So I said, so Bob, what's the biggest one we have? He said, that's the one over the auto body shop. How much is that? In today's dollars, it's $80,000. So I'm saying to myself, oh, okay, that's $80,000. Maybe the other 2 are a little bit less. So maybe I'm looking at $200,000. I'm not including labor. Who knows? It could be more. Last year, in anticipation of projects just like I mentioned with these rooftop units, we were successful in getting community support for the establishment of a stabilization fund.
Okay.
A stabilization fund, which is separate from our budget, allows us to put money aside in a fund for a specific purpose. And it's absolutely critical that our communities are well aware of what the rationale is. It's not a rainy day fund to buy new restaurant tables here. And so what I presented to the committee was the rationale behind putting a sum of money in the stabilization fund for these rooftop units. I don't need to replace them right now. I will need to replace them in the near future.
Right.
And maybe I can couple some stabilization money and some budget money in a future fiscal year. Maybe we go out to bid and replace all 3. Maybe we do them one at a time. But we will be in a position that it will not lead to an assessment spike in any given fiscal year, which is tougher for communities to handle.
What do you have to do in order to be able to use that money? Does that mean that you have to enact a vote from the individual town meetings in order to use that money? Or is that something that it's understood that when the time comes that you will use that money?
The stabilization fund, once created by our towns, becomes the authority of the regional school committee.
Right.
So it will be a vote of the committee to put money in and a vote of the committee to take it out.
Okay.
So there are checks and balances there in order to account for how that's going to get spent.
Okay.
So this year I'm going to request that we put $40,000, which is let's say that's half of one of the 3. Let's say the most expensive rooftop unit. And again, my hope would be that maybe with modest maintenance, we can go a few more years. You mentioned a new roof as a hypothetical.
Right.
We put a new roof on the building in 2011 through the MSBA program. And so the debt service that we're covering on that, there's about $115,000 spread out amongst the 8 towns And we're, I think, we're in the third year of that as well. So when I think about that debt service and think about covering the boiler out of the excess and deficiency account, that's what I think about in prioritizing taking care of the boiler out of that E&D fund. So maintenance and facilities is always something that we have to keep top priority.
And again, I think I like the conversation that we're having, because I think the idea is gearing it towards the folks who are watching in those 8 communities, get a better understanding what it is, how it may differ, or some of the things that you do or the Social Voc does in order to fund its budgets, how you're spending the money, and how the school is benefiting, and in the ways of upkeep and being able to provide a quality education, which is key. I guess the thing I wanted to ask you, and that is, you mentioned earlier in the show about having a new administration. We know with a new governor, new folks being elected, there could be change of philosophies, whether it's in Chapter 70, Chapter 74,
right,
whether it, how you get funding, how you get monies. Is that part of your numbers when you look, or do you just put your numbers together and go from there?
That's a great question. First of all, I think that Governor-elect Baker has made it very clear that he is a strong proponent of vocational technical education. And I would absolutely expect that that'll be reflected in some financial support and in policy. I think Governor Patrick was also very supportive. The grant story that I just told you about from the Mass Life Sciences Center, it's Governor Patrick who prioritized life sciences and manufacturing and information technology and healthcare as key sectors of the economy. We have an allied health program. We have a computer infotech program. We have a machine shop, a precision machine technology program, an engineering academy. So when you have individuals in the executive branch that have a vision, both whether Democrat or Republican, everyone tends to agree that vocational technical education is a key part of the economic engine of Massachusetts. Right. And I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. Now here's the reality. The reality is there isn't always the money there. And I had to bring that message to the committee. It's not a new message. One of the factors that I showed them is that over the last 3 years, our Chapter 70 aid has been relatively flat. So the message basically, probably not just for South Shore, but for many other communities, is that if you assume we're not going to get any new state aid, then any growth in the budget is going to have to be absorbed at the local level. And so while I said to our committee that I'm bringing you an initial proposal for a 3.25% increase, members of a regional school district know that number is one thing. The real number, the number that's going to matter at a town meeting, is the assessment number. Okay. And again, going back to timing, you have a new governor, you have a later state budget. Sometimes we have to make projections, and it's the only responsible thing you can do is to make a conservative projection, because if you don't, if you assume, oh, well, they'll give us 20% more in this or 20% more in that, if that doesn't happen, now we're in a position where we're cutting things, and the last thing I want to do is create instability in that area. So you make a reasonable, strategic, conservative projection for Chapter 70 and also for regional transportation, and then you build the budget off of that. One of the factors in explaining a budget, it's one thing to say, I need more money, this is what I need it for. Then the next phase, as we go into the middle of our budget season, is to explain what's involved in calculating an assessment. And those are conversations that we will have when we go to our area finance committees. It's a complicated topic, but I firmly believe that while people may not always be able to endure the cost of an assessment, at the very least, people need to know how it's calculated. So a transparent, it might be labor intensive to explain a complicated state funding formula.
That's correct.
You'd rather watch paint dry, but at the end of the day, it is the mechanism by which communities either do or do not get money, and it's our responsibility to help communities unpack that so that they know where our budget is headed and how it impacts assessments.
We got less than 5 minutes left. time flies when we sit here and we have a conversation.
There's a lot to talk
A
about.
lot to talk about. Is there something that we haven't touched upon but you feel is very vital to this conversation that folks are watching at home?
I think on the state level, due to the current projected budget gap,
It's about $330 million is what they're saying at the moment.
that's what they're saying, and the Globe has reported last week or a few days ago that it could be upwards of $700 million. Whatever it ends up at, Governor Patrick executed a series of cuts called 9C cuts. He has the right to do that. Regional transportation was included as one of those cuts. Now, there are 79 regional school districts in the Commonwealth, and we were slated as a whole to get an increase of regional transportation money. It's a key incentive to encouraging communities to regionalize. That increase was cut. So I asked the committee to agree to send a letter to the governor asking that those cuts be restored. If regional transportation is a factor of the state budget that every year is going to be unreliable, the end result is it has a negative impact on, it has an impact which is negative on town assessments. It means that they go up. So 9C cuts will not have an immediate impact on South Shore VOCTEC, but it is something that that we need to attempt to address. The other factors, again, I appreciate all this time, Kevin.
It's important. These are important topics.
Right, because a bulk of my conversation, you're not hearing me yet talk about students, and you're not hearing me talking about education and learning, and I don't want to give that zero attention. So one of the ways that we're able to save is that I use a lot of federal grants, Perkins grants, to fund our vocational equipment. I just purchased a $31,000 measuring system for our auto body technology program on a grant. We have to be creative as to how we are able to fund our vocational program. So also built into this budget, I'm pleased to say, because my department heads are pragmatic and they ask for just what they need over a 12-month period, I feel very confident that despite all the major facility issues I'm talking about, I have not starved core instructional areas in order to deal with the maintenance. I'm not choosing one over the other. So new textbooks and investments in technology. Apple TV is something that as our teachers are getting more comfortable with iPad use, they now want to have the ability to go right from their iPad onto a flat screen TV like you see here in the back of the restaurant. Yep. So investments in curriculum and technology continue, and that's something that is absolutely essential. If I didn't think I could fill that bucket first, I would not be talking about all these other items.
I actually will invite folks, if you want to find out more what's going on, whether you have somebody, a student that goes here, or you have an interest in what's going on, I believe the school committee meetings are held the third Wednesday of every month, unless they've moved them accordingly. 30 seconds left. What would you like to say in closing?
The next time the school committee meets, Kevin, just to pick up on your last point, is Wednesday, January 17th. That's the public hearing for our budget. And so oftentimes we'll see members of our finance committees come out to that meeting. It's a great opportunity to engage with members of the community, and I would welcome people to come or to call me personally if they have any questions throughout the budget cycle.
Tom, thank you so much for
Thanks, Kevin.
Taking the time to let us
pleasure.
Come to your fine establishment. And that's another Crosstalk. Until next time, have a great day.
DAV stands behind America's veterans to make their transition back home easier with free services and help getting the benefits they've earned. Help us fulfill the promise to our men and women who served. Go to DAV.org to learn more.